Hey there, everybody. Michael Moore here. I'm coming to you live from our Rumble podcast studios. And I'd like to welcome everybody for joining us for this special live stream. Joining me in a bit will be the filmmakers of Planet of the Humans, Jeff Gibbs, the writer and director, and Ozzie Zehner, the producer of the film. I am the executive producer of the film. Which we never really know what that means, other than I have believed in what Jeff has been doing for a long time. We've all believed in it because we've all been lifelong environmentalists and activists, and have been disappointed and dismayed with the fact that we seem to have lost a lot of the battles, and I don't want to lose these battles because I want the earth to survive. And so for me personally, I just decided that it was time to sort of step up my game, our game, to not be defeated. So we'll get into that in a little bit with Jeff and Ozzie. I want to thank all of you who've watched this movie. Just before we went live here, it was like, I think, 6.2 million of you. I've never posted anything that within the first 12 or so days got 6.2 million views of a feature-length film. So this is such an unheard of thing. And we had no idea it would happen like this, but we're very, very happy. We're happy that you watched the film. We know it's a difficult film. We know it's somewhat what people would call depressing, in the sense that we're pointing out some things that are not too pleasant. And we're asking questions, not of Trump, not of the right wing, not of all the corporate bastards that we're used to fighting, but we're asking questions of friends, people on our side of the political fence, people that we admire, people that we like, people that we've worked with, people that have done so much good work, and organizations that have done good work, and a former vice president that I think most of us voted for, at least those of us. I've never asked these guys who they voted for. I voted. I voted for him. And yet here we are all these years later, and we're in much worse shape than we've ever been before. I'll be posting my podcast later tonight, so by the time you wake up in the morning, you can listen to my thoughts about why I am involved in this film and why I believe that this message needs to get out there. You may have also seen that there is a concerted effort by some people, some organizations, to see to it that you don't see the film. It hasn't worked, but boy, they started on day 2 or 3 of trying to pull the film down, of going after people who were behind the film, and they've not been successful. And I've told everybody, I said, the most important thing is that people see the film. Once they see the film, they're going to know why certain groups or people are so upset at this movie. And so anyways, I'll post my thoughts on this on Facebook tonight, on my Facebook site, Facebook/MMFlint. And you can listen to the podcast late tonight or early tomorrow morning. I think that will explain a lot. And then in a few days, we're going to tell you the truth about behind the scenes of what's been happening in the last week. You may have noticed that PEN America, PEN America, the 100-year-old civil liberties group that was formed by Eugene O'Neill and all the people in its early days, Ernest Hemingway, then later James Baldwin and others, to stand up for writers and authors, and then later filmmakers who are trying to tell certain truths, and people don't want you to hear those truths. And so they try to censor it or block it or shut it down. And so PEN, this wonderful organization that every year acknowledges those who have fought censorship, took a very committed stand against these people who are trying to take down our film. It's always the money, folks. It's and let's just say when the investigative reporting is done on this, it will be even sadder than what we've shown in this film. I'm convinced of that. But we have some internal emails and things that they don't know that we have to show you what they've done to try to silence us and to try and prohibit our free speech. We're grateful to the organization PEN America, which is part of PEN International, who fight all across the globe for free speech. So thank you to PEN for that. We'll get into that in our next live stream, and I'll get into it on my Rumble podcast. But tonight we're here because we are very fortunate to have an organization that I have a lot of respect for. It's an organization that, like some of the new groups, some of the newer environmental groups that are mostly have been initiated by younger people, and who are tired of seeing us lose the battle, the climate battle, the battle against so-called green capitalism, all that stuff that's held us back, that's made the carbon in the atmosphere even worse, all of that. And the name of this group is called Extinction Rebellion. And I came across them last year, and I thought, wow, more of this. They're like doing things I'm even afraid to do. So I had immediate admiration for them. And I think that for all of us to win this battle, to save the planet, to save our species, and to be a different way than the way we've been, we have to reach out to all kinds of organizations and people to join together. And we may have our differences. We may not agree on everything. That's okay. Even the organizations that we show in the film, Sierra Club, for instance, my God, this was started by John Muir and has done so many good things over the last century and a half. So we don't have a bone to pick on that level with anybody on a personal level. We acknowledge and admire the work everybody has done. But what I want to do in these live streams is introduce you to some of the newer, younger groups who are fighting for us and for this planet. So I'd like you to welcome the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Clare Farrell. Clare, welcome very much to our live stream here tonight. You are live from, are you in London, England?
Yeah, I'm in London.
Wow. Okay. So it's like what, 1 a.m. there or something like that?
It's 1:15.
It's okay. Sorry. Thank you for being here and talking to us. Why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about Extinction Rebellion? It's got such a cool, radical name, but there's a lot more to it. And maybe you could share that with the people who are watching us tonight.
Sure. Well, Extinction Rebellion as a name, just to explain, was kind of a technical term. Rebellion teamed up with wanting to be able to talk about extinction, and we really wanted to recognize that at the moment we don't just face a catastrophic situation on climate, but we also are living through a mass extinction event. And these types of events, according to the geological record, usually wipe out the vast majority of life on the planet. It takes an extremely long time for that to recover. And the rates of loss of life all over the planet are actually, in some cases, when you speak to the scientists, they're finding that loss more frightening than the situation that we face with climate breakdown, which I find very sobering, I guess, to think about. But Extinction Rebellion was born out of a group in the UK called Rising Up. It was like a decentralised network of activists who were interested in testing out different tactics of civil disobedience. And I met one of the members of that, Roger Hallam, I guess in about 2017. And I was working on a campaign with him in London on air pollution. We started blocking roads. We started painting government buildings with chalk paint. People started repeatedly getting arrested. And then I worked on another small pop-up kind of campaign against the expansion of Heathrow Airport. And at the same time as doing that, we kind of all agreed, well, most people agreed that we would start something together. So rather than being this decentralized group working across the country, people would come together on one project rather than lots of small campaigns. And we agreed that needed to be a rebellion. And I worked with some friends as part of the sort of initial art department. And then on October the 31st, 2018, we declared a state of open non-violent rebellion against the British government to protest their inaction, which we viewed as a crime against humanity, basically. We declared that the social contract was broken, that we didn't have to be obedient citizens anymore because of their failure on their primary duty, which is to protect their citizens. So we launched with 3 key demands, which first one is tell the truth. So demanding that we see government and institutions tell the truth about the real emergency that we're in. The second demand being act now, which is to go net zero on carbon emissions by 2025 and to reverse biodiversity loss. And the third demand is for a citizens' assembly, and that's to be led by the decisions of a sortition-based citizens' assembly to decide how to reach those goals in line with a recognition of global justice.
Wow. That's everything I just heard sounds so incredible. Like when you say act now, that's not a cliche or a slogan. You mean by 2025. You don't mean act now to you doesn't mean 20 years from now or 30 years from now or 40 years from now. You mean this right now.
Yeah.
Now is now.
Exactly.
So the group was first called Rising Up. You know, Claire, that's such a nicer, softer, sweeter name. Rising Up. It's almost biblical. Rebellion, to declare a rebellion against the government, that is taking it to the next 3 to 30 steps. And the people I've spoken to in your organization and what I've read, it's very powerful to me to hear this level of commitment, because every time we hear that, oh, there's a new accord, there's a new green thing or whatever, it's always about fixing it by 2050. And I'm going, 2050? You, Claire, and the other people of Extinction Rebellion act as if we don't have till 2050 or 2070.
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't. It might already be too late. I mean, that's the point, right? It's like this has been put off and put off and put off and kicked down the road. And every time we hear a target that comes from the government, it is repeatedly something which is definitely nothing to do with them. And that's what we're set up to say, really, is that like enough's enough. And also it doesn't really matter to me that 2025 has been declared as an impossible target, but a lot of people said, oh, but that's not credible, you can't lead on a 2025 target. Well, it's impossible to imagine that we're in this situation, right, that we're in now. It's beyond unimaginable things.
What we're in right now, this is impossible. this is unacceptable. When people say things like that, why they, and especially people on our side of the political fence, they'll try to tamp you down. You know,
Yeah.
25, no, that's impossible. And my answer to them is one of a number of things. Prohibiting smoking in British pubs. That's impossible, right? When you first heard that idea, you thought, no fucking way. Are they ever going to, in British and Irish pubs, stop cigarette smoking? And I think they stopped it in Ireland first. I think it was before we did it here. And you would never have thought that that would happen. That's a small thing. But in my life, I've seen, if you'd asked me when, you know, I was your age, do you think Nelson Mandela will ever get out of prison? You know, and the honest answer would have been, sadly, no. Not only did he get out of prison, he became president of the country. You know, every time when I was younger, when I thought, and I was told, this is impossible. This is not the way we do things. And every time I chose not to listen to that was when I and others saw things get better, when we did have some success. And, you know, it's so inspiring to hear you, you know, talk like this. And also, you and the others are committed to civil disobedience as a tactic to get the attention of the government and the public. Would you explain that a little?
Yeah, well, so before we launched the movement, a bunch of people took this talk around the country, and it's still, the talk goes on, and people can go and see it now in different like parts of the United States where Extinction Rebellion is emerging, and in other countries all over the world. And the talk originally was called Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It. And it was a talk through like the kind of the most terrifying sort of aspects of the risk that we're in terms of climate and looking at biodiversity loss. And then asking people to sort of consider, I guess, what's the meaning of your life if you like know fine well what we're headed for. And the projections, you know, just to remind ourselves, are that like the whole planet is going to be on average over 4 degrees warmer by the end of the century, and that's like beyond a catastrophe. So if you know that, like what would you be willing to do, and then have a think about like the things that have caused radical positive and rapid social change in the past. So we looked at various aspects of movements that have made big success in getting rapid change, and most of them involve people committing non-violent civil disobedience. Most of them involve a fair amount of disruption, and most of them involve people willing to break the law in order to get their point made. And so we decided that was going to be like a key focus. And I guess what's different about the approach that we've taken is doing civil disobedience in kind of towns and cities, rather than what I've certainly grown up with, looking at the sort of non-violent direct action movement as people that go and do quite like brave climbing rigs, or going and blocking industrial sites or whatever. But it often sort of, it looks and feels like there's a fairly high barrier to entry, and it looks and feels like it's something that you can't necessarily do. But if there's like several hundred of you with a pot of paint, and you're all going to go and like paint a message on a wall of a government building together, well, anyone can do that, you know, that it's much more accessible. So part of the focus was to make the actions kind of cheap and simple and as accessible and as easy to repeat as possible. And not new, you know, it's not, we're not clever. We haven't come up with this stuff from scratch. It's like we just looked through kind of the history books and tried to pull out some stuff that we thought might work, and then test it out.
Yeah, I think that is true for most movements. Those who've been willing to commit those acts of civil disobedience, you see the success of those movements. The movements are never really always complete, whether it's our civil rights movement or gay rights movement or whatever. But because they were willing to take that risk, to take many risks, we got to move it. We got to move ourselves a little bit down the field. And I think actually, we asked people for questions beforehand to send them in, and we told people you would be our guest tonight. So if I could maybe ask you a question, I believe you have a question or two from your group.
Yeah.
From Extinction Rebellion. The first question from Martha is she wants to know, by calling the group Extinction Rebellion, I'm going to paraphrase the next paragraph here. Basically, she likes the rebellion part, but by using the word extinction, are you afraid of turning some people off, having them think that maybe you've gone a little bit too overboard? It's hard enough to get people's minds wrapped around the idea of climate change in our country. And then she goes on, but asks again, why the use of that word, which you've sort of explained, but she's saying as a strategy, does this help the movement by having the word extinction so front and center in the name and the purpose of your organization?
Yeah, I guess it does. I mean, I think from the beginning it was an opportunity for us to say something that felt like it might sort of puncture the cultural malaise or something, you know, like, and bring that word into like more commonly used rhetoric, perhaps. I mean, we also launched with a lot of messaging. There's a message that myself and my friend pulled out of a pamphlet that we had that said "Hope dies, action begins," and we pulled that out, and that was kind of part of some of our early messaging. We also actually, in this kitchen, I made a 50-meter long banner that said "Climate change, we're fucked," and we hung that off Westminster Bridge as one of our quite early actions. And that was like an experiment with language. It's like the third sector, the environmental movement, the charities, everybody who's looking at this, scientists, all that behind closed doors, they're all just going, "Oh my God, we are totally fucked." And they wouldn't say it to the public. So, you know, we wanted to like burst through that and say, like, why can't we talk about the reality of this situation? Because like, when you look at the facts, we do look like we're quite fucked, to be fair, you know, and everybody will say it, but they won't say it to their supporters, and they won't say it to the public, and they won't say it on the news, you know.
Right. We need to explain to Americans who are watching that the word fucked in Britain and Ireland is used as often as we would use the word dog or cat. Just so everybody knows that.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. It's because it's exactly how I feel. But I like and maybe that is the Irish that's in me, the dark Irish, that just sort of, I like starting in that place where, yeah, we are fucked. We are fucked. But then right away, my brain goes, I don't feel like giving up. It's not like, oh, we're fucked. It's all like, we are so fucked. What are we going to do now? Right now. What are we going to do right now? I'm done talking. And that is the energy that I have felt for some time. That's the energy behind this film. It's like there's no more messing around here. We are, as you said, out of time. We may already be way out of time. But again, my attitude is, you know, and I love the word extinction. And Jeff, all this research he did over 10 years for this film, and all the most recent statistics are just appalling in terms of the extinction that is actually going on.
Right.
On you want to jump in there, Jeff, with that? Or
Sure. Well, it's an honor to be here, and Claire, it's an honor to meet you and to be commiserating. And it's great to share different perspectives. I think that's how we learn. We come at this from different places, but I was really impressed at just hearing the word extinction, that somebody had the courage to use that word, because that is what we're in. It's a human caused extinction event. And we seem to want to avoid that and not own that. And that's really why I began to work on this film. Is I was just aware, even in my own backyard, the signs of things snapping. Of course, you know, our lakes were not freezing in the winter, and you know, we were out golfing in January. So it was one of the very first things I tuned into. But I was also noticing, and very heartened to see your inclusion of biodiversity, and not just the human extinction potential, but the extinction of the life around us. But yeah, that's, I noticed the trees didn't look normal anymore. And I noticed way back when that the honeybees were disappearing, and then more recently the monarchs. So that it's really the realization when I started to study what's going to happen when we reach that point where it's a tipping point where something happens and we can't pick ourselves up. It's kind of the irony of the human experience is that if we can kind of keep going, we keep in the normal. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but I used to ask, why are people not running the streets screaming, given what we know about the state of the planet? And I really started out to make a film to help us understand that. And I realized that's not what's in the way. There's something else about the story we're in or the time we're in that's blocking us from really coming to grips with how bad it is. So you are indeed running to the streets screaming, literally, which was what I was wondering why more of us weren't flipping out. But yeah, even the last, I read a report that during my lifetime, in the last 50 years, we humans had used more resources than in all of human history. But we were on track to do it again in 30 years. So this is accelerating. And then you read the decline of wildlife as, is it Clare, half or 40%, or I don't know if it's, but somewhere around half of the wildlife has disappeared in the last few decades. And then you look into the reasons. We're all very tuned into climate change, but then you discover some of the primary reasons are the expansion of agriculture, logging, hunting, and fishing. All the things that have kind of the way we've diminished nature for the longest time. Mining is a really huge increasing diminishment of nature, a source of pollution. And all these things are adding up to not only have our human numbers doubled, but even more importantly, on top of that, we've got a 4 times increase in economic activity in the last 50 years. And that's so unequally distributed. So many people are struggling to get by all around the world. And that greed, that wealth is, it accumulates to the 1%, and to the people that have more get more. So that's really what the basis for this was maybe a similar feeling that, we're just in so much more trouble than we're willing to accept. And to me, hope only comes from realism. We want to have this kind of hope that gives us comfort. But that's not the kind of hope that allows us to make a plan for us to survive this. And just as importantly, all the species that we're affecting that don't deserve to perish along with us. So that was really my goal with this film, is at first to create a wake-up call. And then I realized, wait a second, maybe the story we're in is in the way. Maybe the story that we're going to just switch this all over to green technology and run the same world we have now, except on green. And I was just looking up one of the plans for 100% green energy, and we're talking about they want 1 million square miles of wind turbines. Wind turbines don't grow on trees. Hundreds of thousands of square miles of solar arrays. It's one thing to think about putting one on your house or on your cabin. And I was just talking with somebody earlier via email that, the first thing to me is to, however you're powering your home or your life, we've got to make some completely different choices. This is not sustainable. This industrial civilization run by capitalism, I don't believe, no matter how we power it. So, so it's a big story that we're in, and it's hard to get our arms around it, but I think that you're attempting to do that with Extinction Rebellion, and that's what I attempted to do with this film. And just really focus on the story we've gotten of more and more and more that I think has to come to an end if we're to survive.
Yeah, if I could just say something about that, I think like the key demand for us is the third demand. And I don't know if people really, I don't know if a lot of people have really grasped what the kind of magic of running your difficult political choices through a citizens' assembly really means. But obviously, to be able to make the reduction in consumption that's like necessary in line with meeting any of our targets, it's going to be really important that whoever makes that decision, particularly in the wealthy world where people really, really are over-consuming, it's going to be very difficult to get elected on the basis that you're going to cut back everybody's energy consumption and stop them from shopping and stop them from going on holiday and change their jobs. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of questions about that. But if it's necessary, then the way to get political legitimacy around that decision, we think, is to run citizens' assemblies, and they're based on sortition. So it's like a random selection of citizens, a bit like a jury. You select them with kind of conditions, so you make a kind of microcosm of the nation with everybody represented. It would be the most representative form of politics that you could ever see, that I could imagine in the UK, for example. More women, more people of colour, more people of every different kind of race and background. And then they come together and they get fed a whole bunch of information from like the best available experts, and they go through a process of deliberation to come to an agreement about what would be the best policy recommendations. And the point here for me is that, like, our existing political system is about debate, which is basically like a form of entertainment that you learn at public school. It's not about like actually getting new knowledge, and it's not about actually making progress. If you want to make some agreements and have some like collaboration and cooperation with people, you can be held through a collaborative, deliberative process in order to reach a conclusion about what should happen. And when you run really tough decisions through these kinds of mechanisms, you find that they have a great amount of kind of credibility with the public. So an example of something that's happened in relatively recent years is the abortion debate in Ireland. And that was run through a citizens' assembly where a whole bunch of Irish people from all different walks of life came together, and everybody said, oh, the Irish public, they're too Catholic or they're too conservative, there's no way they can change their mind on abortion. And having been exposed to all of this expert information from doctors, from women, they came out, you know, almost unanimously in favour of changing the law so that women had the same access to abortion rights as they do in the rest of in most of the rest of Europe. And so that was a really difficult political topic. It was viewed kind of like toxic, you know, like no politician wanted to say they were for it or against it because it kicked up so much drama. And so when there's something like that that's too hot to handle for politics, if you put it in the hands of ordinary people that don't need to get elected, that don't have vested interests, that aren't lobbied, that aren't bought, then they can make really, really smart, like sensible decisions, because a lot of them care about all the same shit, which is like putting a roof over your head and being able to afford it, feeding your kids, having schools, having healthcare, having access to food. Like normal people just want normal stuff, right? So if they're in charge, they just make really sensible decisions. So that's our sort of aim, is to be able to popularise the idea of that. And it's already starting to seep through. So in the UK, the government have run one already, and we're just seeing the results coming at the end of May. It's not got any teeth, which we would like it to be aiming at 2025. They've debated 2050, of course, for a zero carbon target. It's been run very short length of time and it's not got any power, but it is going to show like what a group of ordinary British citizens who go in, some of them probably not knowing very much about the situation, what they come out and recommend. And the French Citizens Assembly that they've been running, which is being like given the power to guide the government, have just come out with a recommendation, and I'll say in quotes, to prepare, the green recovery should prepare for a different social and economic model that is more resilient in the face of crisis. And that's what a group of ordinary citizens have come out of a deliberative process in France saying to their government. So you can get this result, I think, quite quickly.
You think we could really do something like that in the United States? I mean, from what you know of us, I mean, we can't even, you don't, when you vote for president here, the person who gets the most votes isn't the president. Your say in things is so ripped from you so many times. But this idea sounds so wonderful. And as you were saying, I was just trying to think, how would we do that here? You know, I don't know. But maybe Jeff or Ozzie would want to join in on that. But I think that
the thing I wanted to add is that, I was just doing a podcast yesterday with Raven Redbone and Native American podcast on the Pacific Northwest. And we were talking about, all these big, systems in the environmental movement. But what we wanted to boil it down, it seems like most activism right now that's effective is on the local level. And one of the things I'm aware of is we're severing all the kind of connections with biodiversity in nature, right? but we've also severed the connections with ourselves. And it strikes me that what you're doing is an experiment and a learning process and how to reconnect locally to make change. And I've always said to myself that that's going to be way more important for how we survive what's to come than technology is. The technology of how we live together, and whether that's based on cooperation and love for ourselves and for the living things around us, rather than competition. So is that what you're finding, is that there's a real need for this, for people to organize locally?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a drive in our movement of people who want to organise a lot of assemblies on the local level as well, because, you know, local people are usually fairly good experts in local issues, right? And so yeah, there's that call for it as well. I'm also interested in the person who came off really well in your film was Vandana Shiva. And I think there are some people in the green movement who also advocate for recognizing different types of knowledge and different types of wisdom and different types of knowing how to live and knowing how to live harmoniously with your natural surroundings. And those people are under grave threat from, you know, industrialized extraction all over the world as well. And so the methods by which we want to take the planet's resources aren't just destroying those resources, but they're also destroying like the lives and the livelihoods of some of the last people on Earth who know how to actually live with the Earth well, right? I think that's also something that people would do really well to recognize and to raise up the voices of those people.
Absolutely.
I want to bring Ozzie into this. Ozzie Zehner is the producer of Planet of the Humans. And the three of us behind the film here, we are of Flint, Michigan. We are from Flint. We were either born and raised there or born or raised there. And in Ozzie's case, he was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but made the choice. How old were you, 18 or 19?
I was actually 17 when I first went
17, and
yeah,
like, we were born there, so that, you know, we didn't like choose to be there, but you chose to move to Flint and to go to college there and then stay there after college. So I wanted to make this point in our last live stream that this is a film that comes from three people from Flint. And we want you to see us in that way, because what all of us got out of Flint through our years was something very special and very profound, and a lot of our righteous anger about wanting to save this planet, to save ourselves as humanity, comes from that experience of being of and from Flint, Michigan. And I think a lot of you watching this, I don't have to go into, you know what that means in the modern era, in this last decade, in terms of the tragedy of Flint, not just an environmental tragedy, but a tragedy of poverty, of racism, of economics, that all came together to help poison the water and force people to drink poison water. So, Ozzie, jump into this here, because you're the engineer, and we'll call you the science guy of this operation. Even though I want to point out that all of the scientists that are in this film and all the scientists that both of you spoke with, met with, researched with, traveled back and forth across the country, never on an airplane. I mean, hats off to that. I mean, you walk the walk, and I've learned a lot from you, Ozzie. You wrote a great book called Green Illusions, where it was like one of the first things that I ran across that was saying maybe we should like just pause for a second and figure this out, and don't be afraid to ask questions about the methods that we're using, because we're only getting one shot now, if we even get that. If we put all our eggs in one basket, and that's the wrong basket, what are we going to do? As they say in Britain, we will be royally fucked. So I turn it over to you, Ozzie.
That's some pretty serious language to start out with, but
Sorry about that.
probably appropriate. Yeah. Yeah, that's what started me on the book. Was I just had this of course I also am very interested in the natural world. What Claire brought up really resonated with me, which is this idea that really what we face is a crisis that is about the decline of the living world. And that's always been very special to me. I grew up camping and hiking and biking and being in nature and wilderness. And so it means something to me very personally. And it's the thing that scares me more than anything else. And it looks like the way that the science is moving is that it's actually that collapse and that impending doom that is the most scary thing facing us right now. Even more so than climate change, and is important as that is as a factor as well. And what I really find inspiring about the conversation tonight, and also what we're starting to see, is this idea of citizens becoming involved at a local level, starting where they are, so they don't have to travel, they don't have to fly somewhere, they don't have to go anywhere to do anything. You could start right in your own backyard with the people in your local community, organizing together to take action and actually make a difference. And I think that's very inspiring, that we can start to see local groups take kind of some of the control away from these larger kind of moneyed environmental interests that have really just led us down the wrong road with, joining with the likes of Michael Bloomberg and loggers and investment bankers and billionaires. So I would love, the thing that I find so exciting about this discussion that we're having tonight is we're starting to think about how we're going to bring this back to a local level and start coming up with new ideas where we live.
Claire, you mentioned that you put it out to your organization if they had any questions that they'd like to ask as part of tonight's live stream. Would you like to share one of those or a topic you want to bring up or whatever? The forum is yours.
Okay, sure. So I've got some questions here from people, and I got questions sent to me, by the way, from people in India, people in Italy, people in the USA, and let's see. Okay, so why do you not talk about degrowth in a movie which goes against popular green capitalism and New Deal theories that could lead to solutions?
I'm going to throw this over to Jeff, but before he says this, as this is Jeff's first film, so I've made a dozen, and this is always the number one question: why did you put that in the film? Why did you do that in the movie? How come you didn't bring it up? And I'm like, because I believe in the 90-minute movie. I don't believe in the 3-hour movie. I know I will get to that. I will make a movie about that. But that's funny. That's your first question. I have a whole bunch of those from people going, why didn't you bring up meat? Why didn't you bring up big agriculture? Why didn't you bring up nuclear power? Why didn't you bring up, the list goes on and on. So instead of trying to parse it in any which way or make sense of it, but these are legitimate feelings that people have. They have them when they watch my movies. Any documentary, you just go, wait a minute. I would have. And I used to say Kodak still has an 800 number back when there was film, and you get a camera, make your movie. Don't be waiting around for Michael Moore or Jeff Gibbs to do it. But Jeff, Ozzie, take that whole spate of starting with Claire's question about why wasn't that in the movie?
Sure. Well, yeah, the first answer is we did have a 3-hour movie and we decided that wouldn't work.
But we thought it was brilliant. People must watch this. They must sit there. 4 hours.
I'm aware that it can be frustrating, but a movie is a single story, and this story, kind of ends with the awareness that the story we're in right now, that the only thing is climate change, and that's why I'm so glad that you've included biodiversity and the other
economic justice.
But the story that climate change plus green technology equals we're saved is not the correct story, and we're in the story of our species and our relationship with the planet. So, really, I did, in a single movie to go into the particulars, because degrowth is a movement and there's other movements. That's the discussion we're having now. So by bringing up degrowth, I hope people look it up. I need to research it more, find out what the movement's about. Other movements, I'm learning about Extinction Rebellion. So I just wanted to bring us to that point where we're thinking about this. And, I meant what I said in the movie. It's kind of might seem a little strange, that awareness would save us, but I really feel like we've got to live in the right space and be in the right frame of mind about the time we're in. And I think you go through this grief and you come out the other side and you take whatever actions or then you go from there. But I think bringing us up to that point where we feel it and we realize that we need to change is all the mission of the film could do. And then whether we have more films or more discussions, I'm not smart enough, we're not smart enough to have this all figured out. At the end of the film, go this, that, and the other thing. So that's why we left it there. So we have the discussion we're having now. And that was actually, during the days after Fahrenheit 9/11, which I was a co-producer of, I remember being on the train and randomly people are talking about the movie and discussing it. And then I'm somewhere else and people are talking about it. I was like, that is the highest purpose of a story, is not to tell you I'm so smart I have all the answers, but it launched this discussion. So I think that we've had some little success in doing that. Ozzie, you've ran to degrowth before. What's your?
Yeah, I mean, in some way, you could say we already did make the film. We already did include degrowth in the film. We just didn't say the word, maybe, because you'll see a huge overlap between people in the degrowth movement and what we are experiencing in the film and finding with this story. So I think they're really complementary, but. I'm looking forward to moving in the direction that we're headed, and reaching out more and becoming more involved on a local level, and also connecting internationally with groups. Especially the degrowth movement in Europe is much stronger than it is in the United States, especially in France. And so yeah, I'd like to see more of that fertilization.
Claire, you had another question.
Yeah. So this one I think is quite interesting because Extinction Rebellion has been fairly successful, I think, in tapping into people's feelings. And we've made quite a big deal out of talking about grief and facing it. So somebody sent me this question: what role do you see in the near future for our civilization to collectively grieve?
To collectively grieve. Wow. Jeff?
Or Ozzie, do you have anything?
Oh boy, you're gonna send that one over to me. I think Jeff. I mean, for those people who don't know, Jeff is really a skilled person at understanding the human condition, and also, his work as a social worker. He's fantastic in front of groups when questions like this come up. So, I'm gonna throw it back to you, Jeff.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot.
I want to know what you think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly, if I'm hearing the question right, it's exactly what we need to go through. I think the movie provides that for many people. And the best sign I had about that was that during our initial screenings, some people were very upset and even shocked and temporarily paralyzed, but the discussions went on for hours and hours. And days and days. Do you remember that at the Traverse City Film Festival?
And the other thing that we found was that people would come back a week later and say things like, I just couldn't get your film out of my head. And when they watched it, and I have that experience too when I watch the film. Sometimes I'm kind of left with this kind of heavy heart after I watch the film. And but that's maybe, I think we're finding the beginning is shedding that illusion, shedding the illusions that we carry around, shedding the hope allows us to go to that next space, because hope is a double-edged sword. We found it can be a driver and help us, but it can also cut us and hurt us and hold us back. So I'll
just be personal with it. When I first was aware that things were falling apart, and I felt like there was no conversation in the world, I was really depressed. And so much, sometimes I didn't know if I could function. And so making this film and really learning and diving into this actually allowed me to come out the other side. So I don't know if that's what you find with Extinction Rebellion, that people are afraid to broach this or to dive into this space, but I think you have to come out the other side.
Yeah, I think people find it a relief, actually, to really be able to spend their time with a group of people who are willing to admit it. And that's what I found really early on, actually, was I went to a couple of talks in the early stages and met people who said that, I can't talk about this to my friends, I can't talk about this to my family. When I go on about it to my partner, they tell me to stop making them miserable, or they say, oh, it can't be that bad, otherwise, like, it would be all over the news, everybody would be up in arms, everything would be about trying to shift this thing into reverse, and it's not that bad, you're just reading the worst case scenario projections, and it felt like that really at the beginning of our journey with XR. I think that that we were really in a different space, and when we set out, we kind of recognized that there's this I guess you guys know what the Overton window is. There's the kind of like frame with the kind of accepted public discourse in it, or whatever. We set out knowing that needed to shift, and one of the ways that needed to shift was on the way that we talk about the crisis, and the other way that we wanted to shift it was on the kind of notion of what's a reasonable response to it. So going out and lots of people taking grave risk with their personal freedoms, and so it does feel like with the school strikes, Greta, Extinction Rebellion, and others, in the urgency has ramped up in the last couple of years, and now it seems really obvious to everybody that we're in dire straits. But it's not very long ago, is it, when people were still when it wasn't even really in the news very much,
Claire, we're getting a lot of emails and comments from people in the UK who've seen the movie, and I don't know if you know people that have seen it, Planet of the Humans, but it's the tone of it is different than from the US, and I'm just curious what the reaction's been, or if you have any questions there tonight from anybody who's seen the film and would like to know, what we were saying in the film, or a particular thing that they had a question about, or whatever, because we'd love to answer anything that's on anybody's mind.
Yeah, well, actually, I spoke to several people from our movement, and some of these questions are from people globally. But I actually had one person in the UK who's campaigned a lot on energy stuff, and they wanted to ask you guys why you didn't focus on like the things that are happening with green energy now that are improving efficiency, and why you'd sort of cited some of those old solar sites and things like that, when there was like more up to date green renewable energy sources that you could have studied for some information to present. So I think for me, that's one of the main criticisms that I've heard in the movement is,
Yeah, that's actually an interesting criticism. Yeah. It's not something that we really foresaw. The film takes place over more than a decade, and it's a historical look. And so much of what happens in the film happens in history, and then it comes up to the present day. One thing that's interesting to note about that is it really doesn't matter, if efficiencies of solar cells have changed over that period, or there's been incremental improvements. The fundamental issue is that we're facing a huge potential breakdown of the living world, and we're attempting to address that with another layer of technological solutions that require mining, fossil fuels, all of the dangerous and life-threatening issues that we face now. We're just going to be trying to shift over to another set of challenges. And so what the film says, the underlying message of this film, is that we need to shift out of that story. And so that's why, one of the things, it doesn't matter what science we would have put in the film. It doesn't really matter how recent it would have been. The underlying story would have still been the same. And so I think to have this kind of timeless look, where we start at a solar festival 10 years ago and find out that the solar festival that happened 10 years later is the same problem, the same issue, the exact same thing is happening. And we find that we track that illusion over time.
Let me just explain so people who haven't seen the movie. The movie begins, it does begin 10 years ago, and they build the solar festival as solar power was going to power the concert and everything. And Jeff just wandered backstage and out back and saw that it was having to be powered by fossil fuels. Jump ahead to 90 minutes later at the end of the film, we're at Earth Day. Was it last year or the year before? And in, I think, DC, and they're claiming again that this is all being powered by, solar energy. And again, it just took a few minutes to prove that that wasn't true. And it's like, then if you have that happen for 10 years, and Ozzie and Jeff, you can tell all the other times where you ran across this and your mind just gets blown because we're told one thing, but the reality is something else. And people are afraid to kind of question this because there's almost a religious thing around all of our beliefs in the green movement. We're part of the green movement. So we've always been that. You guys, in some ways, Jeff, you were more than any of us with all of that and the solar panels and everything. But yeah, it's
kind of like a movie about things we're afraid to think about. And, I was a young, I wanted to see myself as a pioneer, trying to live sustainably. So I moved to the woods, and I really didn't want to think about the first thing I had to do was cut down the trees, to make my place in the woods. So was I being a friend of the woods, or was I creating the story about myself? I had a wood stove, and, I didn't want to think about, well, where's the steel going to come from? I'm this guy in the woods. So it's the same kind of question that we're asking now. It's the one estimate that would take literally over 1 billion tons of steel to try and build out enough green infrastructure to save ourselves. Steel is one of the main sources of climate pollution, mining disasters that have happened and all around the world and have really harmed indigenous people and killed entire, I think there was a mining disaster in Brazil that killed an entire river, ecosystem. And this is what we're facing with trying to keep this going through technology. So it's a kind of a hard turnaround to realize that the efficiency of solar panels doesn't matter because it's all based on extraction. You have to have carbon to make steel. You have to have carbon to make cement. You have to have fossil fuels. And then if it did matter, and we had solar-powered fishing trawlers, solar-powered chainsaws, solar-powered bulldozers, solar-powered, plows, plowing up more and more prairie, we have to, I don't have the answer to this, but we need to find a different way to live. And when we find that different way to live, if we're using a bit of solar or a bit of whatever, then that's a whole different story. But we haven't found the right way to live. And that might sound pie in the sky, but I think that's what your discussion's about. And, that we have to discover what that is. And maybe you're right. We've got to look at nationally, but maybe change happens at the local level. Maybe somebody's going to discover some ways of living and thinking about this that will spread around the globe. So that's why the movie doesn't focus. It's not a movie about the efficiency of solar panels. It's a movie that shows you in our journey of discovery what it actually means to build this world of technology that we call green.
We didn't make this movie to have, we weren't interested in a discussion about that solar panel or this solar panel, or just as we wouldn't have a discussion about the internal combustion engine of the automobile and how, well, that internal combustion engine is better than that internal combustion engine. You're having the wrong discussion if you're talking about that. And somebody wrote me about the film, and he said, that solar panels that you showed from when you started the movie 10 years ago, those were only 8% effective, he said. And now he goes, and I'm waiting, okay, what are they today? And he says, they're 20% effective. And I'm like, oh, that's progress? I mean, I don't even want to have this discussion, but it's 20%. Oh, so I'm supposed to feel better. If this computer that I'm on right now was 80% not effective, would I even be using it?
we got emails like, why didn't you say more about, the inefficiencies? Like Ozzie, we left out, we didn't talk about the capacity factor.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. So it's interesting that even if you did have a 20% solar cell in Michigan, it's only going to get sun on average less than 20% of the time. So by the time you multiply those two factors together, you're getting something that has the effectiveness of around 2 or 3%. So actually, you could even argue that maybe people have left left watching the movie thinking that solar cells are actually more effective than they are. So yeah, we could go down that road and talk about the details forever, but it really doesn't change that underlying.
If you leave the movie saying, if only we had better solar panels, and it's like, oh my God, then we have failed. Because Jeff, you put this beautifully the other day about somebody was asking, and you said, when we get into this, like we've already spent just 5 minutes on this right now, when we get into this discussion, we're actually, it's not so much that there's a right or wrong answer, it's that the wrong question is being asked. And that's when you see this film, you'll see that on some level, we don't even care about what percentage that is. We're asking some larger political, philosophical, economic, existential questions that need to not only be answered, but acted upon yesterday.
I personally think that the 1%, the people that are very comfortable, the billionaires, the bankers, Goldman Sachs of the world, want us to be focused on technology. They don't want us to be thinking about how we're going to redistribute wealth so that people are not suffering across the planet. So people don't have to go down and chop down the last of nature to take care of themselves. So they don't have to eat the last wild animals. They don't want us to be having that discussion. They don't want us to be thinking about a different way to live. And that's the genius of what I'm hearing about Extinction, is that you're starting, with allowing people to feel things. And I just wanted to say, whatever debate we're having about green technology or whatever, it's all about creating community, because we need to come together and learn how to talk together from all kinds of different sides. And so if I went to an Extinction Rebellion and was part of a meeting, I would fully accept people's right to advocate for technology or whatever they want. I would have my point of view. But the main thing is, we're people who come together, who are accepting the time we're in, that the word extinction is real. And it may be happening so slowly, we've been in denial. And there may be a day, like happened the last couple of months, where we realize maybe this isn't a future thing. Maybe it is right now.
Ozzie, there's a question here from Jose, and he asks, how is global warming related to COVID-19 in your view? The film doesn't obviously deal with this because this just happened in the last couple of months, but I think as you're watching the film, you can't help but think about the pandemic we're in the middle of. And how would you answer this person? What's the takeaway from this movie when you leave it and you think about what we're going through right now? Is this, as I say, is this Mother Nature's little slap on our face to give us a warning of what's ahead if we keep behaving the way we keep behaving? I don't. What either of you, Ozzie, Jeff?
Well, yeah, we're facing, no one wants to face death and disease, and so that's one of the things that we're going to have more of in a planet that has fewer resources on average for people who are living in it. And the coronavirus is kind of like a time for us to think about that, in my mind. And if we do get back to normal, then we are certainly doomed. And maybe that's the thing that we should be focusing on, is what does it mean to get back to normal, and what is the new normal going to be? Because this is our chance to maybe get it right.
How about you, Claire? What are your thoughts? You are suffering through the same pandemic in the UK. How have you thought about this as it relates to our natural world and how we've treated it?
Well, I think there's historic link between the way that we live with the living world and the way that we treat animals, and several different types of diseases, and this is just the latest wave to come from that. And there are some people who've researched the sort of connection between that and industrialized farming and the way that we like deal with our agricultural systems, the way that we treat animals in general. But I think for me at the moment, it feels really obvious that there are parts of the progressive kind of community who are feeling quite hopeful that, you know, people have stopped shopping, people are stuck at home considering the point of their lives. You know, we're living through a massive tragedy which has all eyes on the government. Lots of people are going through this great pain, and I think some people think there's a hope that we can kind of come through this, you know, with people ready to live their lives really, really differently. And I understand why that seems like an appealing thing to believe in, but there's a political reality to the time that we're living in too, right? Which is governments that are failing to take the action to protect their citizens that they should or that they could have done. You know, which is similar to our complaint about climate change and about other environmental problems. And also we're about to see potentially some of the biggest bailouts which we could ever imagine. You know, going to look back on 2008 and 2009 and think, well, that was just a laugh, you know. And if those bailouts come unconditionally, especially recently, I was told that in Europe they're going to make 3 trillion euros worth of bailouts with no conditions attached, in line with Paris Agreement commitments or climate change agreements. So it's not looking good whilst everyone's like locked up at home fearing for their lives, and the same deals that you could predict are all on the brink of being signed, you know. And so I think this is a really critical time for people to recognize the loss that we can make in these moments, you know, because well, we've all read Naomi Klein, haven't we? We know what goes on in times like these, and it's time people need to become extremely vigilant in looking at their governments and watching what's going on with their public funds.
We have about 5-10 minutes left. Claire, do you have another question from members of your organization?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Ozzie, if you considered, whilst you were looking at efficiency and questioning renewables, did you consider putting anything in the film about the efficiency paradox or about the Jevons paradox, which I'm guessing you've looked into, but maybe people watching this don't know what it is.
Yeah, so the Jevons paradox is this idea that as you make things more efficient, they become more easily available or cheaper, and so people use more of them, and you end up back in a position where you're using more energy, even though you've created something that's more efficient. And Jevons recognized that with the early steam engines. We don't really have that in the film. I talk more about that in the book actually, and another way of looking at that is the flip side of that. It looks like it's also true, which is like when we make more energy, we believe that we have an energy crisis and that we need maybe more renewable energy or more solar cells or wind turbines. But what happens, what we found is that as we build more energy out, that just speeds the system, which requires even more energy. And then the energy use grows and grows, which is why one of the things I looked at in Green Illusions was how do we get out of that cycle and stop thinking of terms of how we need more energy to thinking more in terms of how do we conserve energy overall without encountering those limitations of the Jevons paradox or getting caught into that trap. It's tricky, but you know, at least if you recognize that, you're asking a better question.
What are your thoughts about that, Claire?
Well, I discovered it actually as an idea when I was reading a really interesting set of essays about degrowth theories, and it was interesting because a lot of that work that I was looking at was quite philosophical. It's not like people understand how to like do degrowth technically. Here's the list of things you do and the stages you go through. Here's how you do it. But it's quite a philosophical kind of approach, and I guess I was kind of surprised when I was reading it because I've been lecturing for over a decade now on sustainability and fashion. My background's in fashion design, and I've been working in ethics and sustainability, or trying to. Not that you can make such a good living from doing fashion in a sustainable way, but I've been working in that for a long time. Huh?
It's my background too. So
is it?
Yeah.
I like your cap, by the way, Michael.
Okay, I wear that in honor, and you know, we get these statistics from YouTube, and the UK is our number 3 country in the world watching this movie, after the US and Canada. Australia and Germany are 4 and 5. So
interesting.
It's really, it is very interesting to see how, like, in the middle of the night when we're asleep, and you have awakened in Europe. Can I still say Europe when I say UK?
Just about. Just
okay.
about.
But it goes around the clock. I mean, it's literally, this past weekend it was 25,000 people an hour watching the movie. We would not have enough movie theaters to be able to, if we were back in movie theaters, to actually fit people in that wanted to see this film. There was a huge desire to have this discussion. People know something's wrong. They know that our backs are against the wall, that our politicians have hugely let us down, that the corporations and the rich do not have our best interests at heart. And we show this in the movie, how we're upset of how the 1% have tried to co-opt our movement, have tried to buy it off and convince people that capitalism will be the savior of this planet. And it's just stunning to us, because it's not only not the case, it is part and parcel, hand in hand. The destruction that we're experiencing is because of the profit motive of greed, of not putting people first, all of that stuff. It's all part of the same whole rotten thing. And you know, our hope is that this movie triggers not only an intense discussion. The intense discussion hasn't really happened here yet. Like I said, 80% of the people that comment on YouTube are really happy we made the film and support the film. But the discussion is trying to. There's some people that want to control it through vitriol and kind of an overheated thing, like, why would we make this movie? Because we don't want to die. That's why. You know, it's good people can have honest disagreements of how to go or where to go with all of this. But so that's why we invited you, and we are inviting other incredible environmental groups and people that have done good things to jumpstart this. You've already jumpstarted it. Greta has already done that. Lots of young people have done it, and that's I think probably where a lot of the answer to this movement is going to be. But did you have any final things that you wanted to say, Claire? And then I'll send it over to Jeff and Ozzie before we wrap up.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just to say that what we were talking about on that Jevons paradox issue, it really struck me at that point where I was reading about it that we're not perhaps even asking the correct questions, because a lot of sustainability conversations begin with efficiency and people talking about how to make things more efficient, and they certainly have done in the fashion industry, rather than beginning with looking at where our waste goes, or looking at like how the polyester industry, if left to its own devices to have a good time, would be doubling in the next, I think it's 15 years. That 60% of the world's polymers are made into textiles, not plastic bottles. So when everyone's freaking out about the plastics crisis, they're not talking about textiles. They're talking about something which makes up, I think, between 30 and 40% of what we're making polymer into. So if we're not asking the right questions at this like crucial moment, then to me that seems extremely important. And so yeah, I'm just keen to see people open-minded and interested to like have these conversations. I think it's okay to disagree. It's okay to like discuss and debate the technicalities, but I think it's really important for us to discuss the sort of bigger philosophical basis from which we attempt to win this battle.
I agree with that. Absolutely. Ozzie, how about you?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Claire said it right. I mean, I don't even know how to follow that up, but I have a similar feeling. I'm eager to ask questions. I find that they're a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun with it, even the really difficult ones. And I don't ever pretend to have the answers. I just like to think about the questions and think about how we can make them better. I think I agree with Claire that that's the first step.
Jeff?
Yeah, well, this last bit of discussion, as simple as it seems about the paradox, is exactly the kind of discussion I think we need to move into, because moving away from obsessing which kind of solar panels or which kind of, why did you leave nuclear out? It's like, the last thing the clever apes that have taken over the whole planet need is just one more source of energy until we kind of figure ourselves out and figure out this system. So exploring what it means to be human and these paradoxes we have to solve about ourselves. I think this is where the future lies. And starting with, I just want to reinforce, I had hoped that there would be some place for people to go to talk about their grief and to talk about the pain and to be able to say, to talk about the reality of the time we're in without having people say, shut up about that. And I'm so glad that you have created a place. And we hope that we can all do that in our own way, because keeping this to ourselves is probably the worst thing we can do. So having the discussion about who we are as humans and where we're going is exactly what I wanted to we're a little bit complicated, so we're going to have a number of talks about who we are and where we're going from here as we figure ourselves out and figure out how to take care of everyone and to value the living world as much as we value ourselves. And that's the bottom line for me.
Yeah. Well, I think that watching this movie, you can take it out of the context of what we're going through. And it's not just the coronavirus. In this country, this is 3+ years of Donald Trump that we have suffered through. It's so frightening to us because now we used to say it as kind of a cliche, this guy's going to get us killed. No, that's exactly what's happening. His behavior, his ignorance, his narcissism, all of that works against us. But it's not just Trump, it's all the other things that gave us Trump. And if somehow we're not able to figure out how to fight that and how to get on the other side of this, it's so critical. I am not without hope, but I'm also a realist. I don't believe in pie in the sky. I'm not into wishful thinking. But I do believe that our fellow Americans and people who are watching this around the world, you're going through your own things with your own governments and politicians and whatever. But we did make this film as if we were running down the middle of the street with our hair on fire. Jeff, you do have some hair. I've seen it. No, but seriously, we can't wait any longer. And we can't be silent any longer. And I know you see people trying to shut the film up. I worry what that does to the average person who's living in Boise or Kansas City or whatever, and they see, oh, wow, if I ever spoke out, if I ever asked a question, if I ever wondered, is there another way we should be going about fighting climate change, saving this planet, going after the 1% who are making our lives miserable? The message is shut the fuck up. And, that just doesn't work in a free society. And it hasn't worked with this film. And we're very blessed that so many people haven't paid attention to any of that and have gone ahead to see the various truths that you and Ozzie have presented to us. And what we want, Claire, out of this as filmmakers, we want action, not hope, not some feel-good thing. And I believe that it's action, the grief that we feel over the fact that we may be the last peoples, these last generations on this planet, and how we see people suffering today because of the way we've treated the animals on this earth, and where viruses, we're going to see more and more of this, and there won't be enough time and enough vaccines to prevent the deluge that is going to come at us. And we just refuse to give in to that. And we're going to have the right discussion. We're going to have the right conversation, and then we are going to act. And I don't mean next year act or 5 years act. Act like you said. Act now. Act now. And don't let fear consume you. It's this. So many examples in history where the impossible happened, and I believe that the same thing can happen here, but only if we all get up off the couch and get active. Think of what's that one thing you could do tomorrow, when you wake up in the morning, even though we're stuck inside of our apartments or our homes, or if you're an essential worker slaving away so the rest of us can eat, or turn on the tap, or turn on these lights. Thank you for that. Thank you for risking your life so we could have that. I'd like to repay it to you by getting up tomorrow morning and doing some action, something. And let's continue that discussion online. You can go to planetofthehumans.com. You can go to my Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. You can do it right here on YouTube. We're grateful to be able to YouTube to be able to do this. They've been very supportive of us in this film, and to everybody else out there, it's immense gratitude to you. Let your family and friends know this is free. We decided to not distribute the film for money. For the first 30 days online, it's free, and we want everybody who wants to see this film to not end up having to pay to see it afterwards. Watch it now for free. Share it with your family and friends. Share this discussion that we had with Claire and Extinction Rebellion tonight. Claire, if people want to join Extinction Rebellion, how do they do that?
Right. Well, I guess a lot of your audience might be in the United States, so it's probably cool if they look up on Facebook, because a lot of groups will have local and regional groups where you can connect with people who are close to you. But if you're not sure around the world, you can go to rebellion.global, which is a global website, and on there you can find links to all of the national teams and local working groups and stuff. So you should be able to track stuff down on there. And if you're in the UK, you can look at rebellion.earth.
Okay, that's great. And Jeff, anything else on your website or anything where people can talk to you or ask more questions or whatever?
You can send an email right from the website. So let us know what you're thinking, and we're open. We do read the questions, and we love to answer them.
Yes. And Ozzie and Jeff will be back on my podcast very soon. As I said, the podcast later tonight, tomorrow morning, will be about this film and the issues and why I personally am involved in it. And I'd love for you to hear it when it's posted on rumble.media. It's also on Apple Podcasts and Google and Stitcher and Anchor. And leave me a message. You can actually leave me a voicemail on the Anchor platform. So I'd love to hear from you. And we'll do this live stream again. If not later this week, definitely next week. And we'll have other guests. We want this conversation. This is why we made the film. We want this conversation to happen. So please watch the film, and then talk to us. We'll talk to you, and we'll find our way. We'll find our way. I believe that. Jeff, you believe that. Ozzie, Claire. We wouldn't be doing this if we thought there was no hope, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Maybe
Yeah.
I would. Maybe I would. If I actually believe that there's no hope, then I'm here, so I might as well entertain myself, I guess. I don't know. But I don't believe that. I believe in the power of the many.
Action is the antidote to despair.
Absolutely. So think about what you could do locally, and what you can do. Use this film in any way that you want to alert people and to start that discussion. I want to thank everybody for watching tonight. I want to thank the 6.2 or 3 million people who've already watched the film. Actually, those are the downloads. So I know there are people at home. There's more than one person watching it. So there's could be as high as 10 to 12 million actual individuals who've seen the film. So it's, we're grateful. And we want to hear from you, and we want to see your work someday. So thank you, everybody, for being on this part of the special live stream event here. It's from my Rumble Media. And go to planetofthehumans.com, and we'll talk to you very soon. Don't give up. Wash your hands. And know that we're all in this together. You're not alone. You are not alone. So be well. Take care. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ozzie. And thank you very much, Clare Farrell.